In August 1944, the highways of France saw an extraordinary logistical effort that fundamentally changed how modern armies approached supply chain management. Representing the pinnacle of American industrial might, this operation delivered supplies at an unprecedented scale, which even German military strategists deemed impossible. For Wehrmacht units retreating through France during the summer and autumn of 1944, witnessing endless columns of American trucks moving around the clock was a display of power they could not match. This was more than just a tale of trucks and cargo. It demonstrated that modern warfare had evolved to be as much about industrial production and logistical efficiency as it was about tactical prowess. The Allied victory's success was not solely dictated by battle plans, but also by statistics related to manufacturing output and innovative supply chain practices, which would reshape military logistics for decades. The crisis began on June 6, 1944, with the D-Day landings in Normandy involving 15,600 troops in the initial wave. Supported by nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft, this massive operation brought an unprecedented amount of equipment and vehicles to France. By late June 1944, Allied forces had already unloaded 70,000 vehicles through temporary harbors constructed at Mulberries and directly onto the beaches. These makeshift facilities processed supplies at rates surpassing many established European ports. The Mulberries alone handled 7.5 million gallons of fuel and 500,000 tons of supplies by late June. Breaking out from Normandy's bocage countryside proved far more challenging than initially anticipated. For 7 weeks following D-Day, Allied forces were confined to a narrow beachhead stretching just 50 miles wide and 20 miles deep. German defenders took full advantage of the defensive capabilities offered by Norman hedgerows, resulting in a prolonged battle that threatened to revert to static trench warfare reminiscent of WWII. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, 1944, finally broke through German lines west of St. Lo. Following intensive carpet bombing by Allied air forces, American infantry and armored units breached the enemy positions and surged into the open French countryside. The rapid progress made by the Allied forces caught even their own leaders off guard. On August 1st, General George Patton's Third Army became fully operational and promptly initiated swift advances that would come to define their push through France. Within a matter of weeks, Patton's troops were advancing at a rate of between 50 and 75 miles per week, with some stretches seeing as much as 80 miles covered in a single week during peak operations. By mid-August, elements of the Third Army had reached the Seine River, more than 150 miles from the Normandy beaches. This operational success brought about an unprecedented logistical challenge. The Allied bombing campaign, which had isolated Normandy from German reinforcements prior to D-Day, also devastated much of France's railway infrastructure. Consequently, the French railway system was in ruins and unable to transport the necessary supplies for rapidly advancing armies. Each combat division required roughly 700 to 700 tons of supplies daily, with 28 Allied divisions moving through France by late August. Total daily requirements surpassed 20,000 tons. Patton's armored divisions alone consumed approximately 400 divisions alone consoline each day during offensive operations. Supply trucks traveling from Normandy to forward units had to make round trips back to the beaches for additional loads. As the front line advanced further eastward, these return journeys became significantly longer. A truck delivering supplies 200 miles inland required over 50 hours to complete a full cycle, while at 50 miles from the coast, it could manage 2 deliveries per day. By August 20, 1944, American forces were grappling with critical shortages of fuel and ammunition that threatened to halt offensive operations entirely. Forward units were literally running out of gas in sight of retreating German troops. The rapid advances of August were about to stall not due to enemy resistance, but because supply trucks could no longer keep up. In a frantic 36-hour planning session starting on August 23rd, Transportation Corps officers devised a solution that would later become legendary. They established dedicated express routes using parallel one-way highways exclusively for military supply traffic, operating around the clock. The operation would be known as the Red Ball Express. This name originated from a practice used on American railroads in the late 19th century. During the preparations for D-Day, A logistics system in England had utilized the name Red Ball Express to expedite supplies to southern ports. Officers from the Transportation Corps adopted this designation for their new initiative. Colonel Lauren Albert Ayes was assigned to oversee the organization of the operation and was nicknamed Little Patton by his subordinates due to his aggressive leadership style. He faced the daunting task of amassing an adequate number of trucks and drivers to sustain a massive logistical effort on an unprecedented scale. Approximately 6,000 vehicles, with 12,000 drivers working in two-person teams, were required along with mechanics to maintain the fleet, traffic control personnel, and route systems capable of handling constant traffic without causing congestion. These trucks featured six-wheel drive with a 207 six-cylinder engine producing 91 horsepower and Warner 5-speed transmissions equipped with overdrive. They could transport up to 212 tons off-road or 5 tons on improved highways. The standardization of the CCKW trucks provided a significant advantage compared to German logistics. Each truck was identical, built to the same specifications using interchangeable parts, allowing any mechanic to service any vehicle and enabling drivers to operate any type within the fleet. This industrial uniformity was commonplace in American manufacturing, but far exceeded the capabilities of Germany's diverse array of 15 different truck models, each requiring unique spare parts, specialized mechanics, and specific maintenance procedures. This fragmentation led to ongoing logistical challenges. German units frequently had immobilized vehicles waiting for parts that never arrived, as manufacturers either ceased operations or shifted their production lines elsewhere. Ayes required 23,000 men willing and able to drive continuously under grueling conditions. The military's response mirrored the racial dynamics of America in the 1940s. About 75% of Red Bull drivers were African American soldiers. In 1944, the U.S. Armed Forces remained segregated. Leadership generally deemed African Americans unsuitable for combat roles, assigning them predominantly to service and support units instead. Consequently, these units had a disproportionate number of black enlisted men who carried out critical, but often overlooked tasks like transportation and supply management. Despite being barred from combat positions due to race rather than capability, many of these soldiers would demonstrate their abilities under conditions just as challenging as those faced by frontline troops. Most Red Bull drivers were younger than 24 years old and had no prior experience operating trucks before joining the military. They hailed from diverse backgrounds across America, ranging from urban areas to rural farms, and were united in their determination to contribute to victory despite facing discrimination both at home and within the military ranks. On August 25, 1944, the Red Bull Express commenced operations. The first day saw 67 truck companies with 3 AFT-58 vehicles transporting a total of 448 tons of supplies. Initially, the route extended from Sanlo to Chartres, covering about 155 miles. Within 4 days, the operation had expanded to include 42 truck companies operating 5 tiny 58 vehicles in total. This system established a continuous loop of traffic unprecedented in military logistics history. 2 parallel highways were requisitioned between Normandy and forward supply depots. One carried loaded trucks eastward toward the front lines, while another returned empty vehicles back to Normandy for reloading. Civilian vehicles were banned entirely. Military trucks that did not belong to Red Bull convoys were not allowed on these designated routes. Continuous traffic control was maintained at every major junction by way of checkpoints. The 793rd Military Police Battalion staffed the checkpoints, documenting convoy movements, giving directions, ensuring priority passage, and upholding operational protocols. This battalion's emblem consisted of 2 red spheres positioned diagonally across a yellow stripe on a green backdrop, symbolizing their historical role. Each truck bore prominent red balls painted on its sides and front radiator grille to indicate its position within the convoy, as well as additional markings that specified both the parent unit and cargo type. These visual aids enabled controllers to oversee traffic efficiently and address issues swiftly without halting convoys for inspection. The operational demands were exceptionally rigorous. Formal guidelines stipulated that convoys comprising 5 or more trucks should maintain a 60-foot distance at a speed of 25 mph, with jeeps leading the way and bringing up the rear. Scheduled rest breaks of 10 minutes every hour were mandated by these rules. Nighttime navigation employed cat-eye blackout lights to minimize visibility from above, while providing just enough illumination for safe passage. In reality, however, many regulations were often disregarded. Individual trucks frequently departed Cherbourg as soon as they were loaded rather than waiting for complete convoys to assemble. Drivers bypassed the speed governor that capped their top speed at 45 mph and regularly exceeded it on straight stretches of road. Rest stops were also skipped when drivers felt capable of continuing without rest. The mission's criticality trumped safety regulations, compelling both personnel and vehicles to operate beyond their limits in order to sustain supply lines. A round trip between Cherbourg and Chartres covered roughly 254 hours and was officially supposed to take 54 hours. Drivers worked in pairs, switching off at the wheel for driving or resting within the cab of the truck. In principle, each driver received sufficient rest during this period. In actuality, factors such as poor road conditions, mechanical issues, and operational demands often left drivers deprived of adequate sleep for several days at a time. Private James Rucard, a 19-year-old driver from Maple Heights, Ohio, recounted his experiences in interviews archived by the Veterans History Project. The highways were littered with dead bodies and horses following bombing raids. Despite being afraid, I did my duty, hoping for the best outcome. Given his youth and distance from home at around 4,000 miles away, anyone would feel fear in such circumstances. The physical toll was relentless. Damage to roads caused by combat and weather resulted in extremely harsh driving conditions. Potholes encountered at high speeds threw drivers against the cab interiors. Tire failures were frequent, necessitating roadside repairs while racing to catch up with convoys. Mud emerged as the most persistent operational obstacle, transforming unpaved stretches into quagmires that impeded vehicle progress and slowed down entire convoys. Washington Rector of the 3-time 1/16th Quartermaster Truck Company later reflected on the discrimination that persisted even during this critical period. Despite knowing about it beforehand, soldiers had to accept it. We were cautioned against fraternizing with white individuals for fear of causing trouble. One veteran recalled an incident where a black unit tried to overtake a white convoy. In response, the white drivers deliberately steered their trucks into the center of the road to block the passage, creating a hazardous situation akin to a game of chicken on roads where speed was crucial. Nevertheless, despite facing discrimination, fatigue, and danger, Red Bull drivers continued operations that enabled Allied forces to advance. On August 29, 1944, the system reached its peak capacity. This figure surpassed the total tonnage Germany could move through all means combined, truck, rail, and horse-drawn transport, on their most efficient day. The magnitude of this accomplishment becomes evident when comparing it to German logistics capabilities. At any given time during these operations, approximately 900 trucks were on the road. Of these, roughly 2,000 moved loaded towards the front lines while another 2,000 returned empty to Normandy. Meanwhile, the remaining vehicles underwent loading, unloading, refueling, or maintenance activities. Each day, the system managed more than 6,000 vehicle movements while ensuring uninterrupted operation. Maintaining the Red Ball Express demanded extensive resources. The consumption of about 2 million gallons of gasoline per month by these trucks was solely for their operational needs and not including the fuel they delivered. Tire wear from constant high-speed travel on damaged roads led to an estimated 50,000 tires being replaced over the course of 83 days. Maintenance issues typically left around 10% of the fleet out of service due to repairs at any moment. The logistical network included setting up fueling stations, maintenance facilities, and traffic control checkpoints along the entire route. Repair teams had to be ready to respond rapidly to breakdowns, and spare parts needed to be supplied to these maintenance locations. Despite all this metal-intensive logistics, the primary mission of delivering supplies to combat units proceeded without a hitch. For German forces defending against the Allied advance, American logistical capabilities posed insurmountable challenges. At the start of the war, Germany had around 250 50-50-50s, and its reliance on them increased as the conflict progressed. losses in motor vehicles exceeded production capabilities, compelling German divisions to depend more on horse-drawn wagons. Even as Allied forces became increasingly mechanized, a typical German infantry division operating in France during 1944 consisted of about 50 motor vehicles alongside roughly 150 mortars horse-drawn wagons pulled by between 4,000 and 6,000 horses. These animals required daily sustenance of approximately 12 pounds of oats and 15 pounds of hay, along with continuous access to water. In offensive operations, horses could cover roughly 15 to 20 miles before needing rest. A German supply convoy consisting of 40 horse-drawn wagons and a dozen trucks from various manufacturers could transport about 40 tons of supplies over 20 kilometers on good roads. This required feeding poignant 80 horses and maintaining the diverse fleet of trucks, which had no standard spare parts due to Germany's fragmented industrial output of many different models. In contrast to a single Red Ball convoy consisting of 50 trucks, which could transport 105 tons of supplies over a distance of 200 kilometers within the same time frame, German forces were only able to move 40 tons over a span of 20 kilometers. This tenfold advantage in logistical capacity provided American troops with operational capabilities that German commanders struggled to rival. Efforts by the Germans to disrupt Red Ball operations yielded minimal results. Luftwaffe attacks, once considered the main threat to convoy activities, became largely ineffective as German air superiority diminished under sustained Allied fighter dominance. When German units attempted ambushes on supply columns, they found that American logistics personnel defended effectively when under attack. Drivers carried personal weapons and fought back, while military police escorts engaged attackers with automatic firearms and called in rapid reaction forces equipped with overwhelming firepower. The few successful ambushes led German commanders to conclude that attacking supply convoys risked disproportionate casualties relative to any potential benefits. Operational factors rather than enemy actions posed the primary threats to Red Ball operations. Driver fatigue often resulted in accidents that injured or killed personnel and damaged vehicles. A veteran recounted witnessing drivers fall asleep at the wheel, crashing into ditches or other trucks. Mechanical breakdowns temporarily reduced the number of available trucks until repairs were completed by maintenance teams. Continuous heavy traffic combined with weather conditions caused significant road damage, necessitating ongoing repair efforts to maintain route viability. Despite these challenges, Red Ball Express managed to deliver between 420,000 and 420,000 tons of supplies from August 25 to November 16, 1944. Different sources provide varying totals for this figure. This amount represented over 1 million individual truckloads moved on average distances of approximately 250 miles through weather-related difficulties, mechanical issues, and operational demands that would have overwhelmed less robust logistical systems. The operational scope expanded beyond the initial route as Allied forces continued to advance. By late September, numerous express routes were operating across France, each bearing unique markings but adhering to the same operational guidelines set by the initial Red Ball initiative. The White Ball Express commenced its journey from Le Havre and Rouen to Paris in early October. Meanwhile, the Little Red Ball transported essential supplies from Normandy to Paris. Another key route was the Green Diamond Express, which moved supplies from Normandy to railheads situated 100 miles inland. Additionally, the Red Lion Express supported the British 21st Army Group in Belgium. The ABC Express linked Antwerp with depots located 90 miles inland, once the strategic port opened in November. These interconnected routes formed a robust transportation network that operated independently of railway infrastructure, offering flexibility unattainable by traditional logistics systems. When German counterattacks disrupted rail lines, truck convoys could reroute within hours. If ports became congested, supplies seamlessly shifted to alternative routes. The American logistics system showcased resilience through redundancy and adaptability. The Red Bull Express officially ceased operations on November 16, 1944. By then, French rail lines had been sufficiently repaired to resume supply movements. More significantly, the port of Antwerp in Belgium was captured intact on September 4th and fully opened for shipping by late November, after Allied forces cleared German troops from the Scheldt estuary. With its deep water facilities, Antwerp could handle far more tonnage than the Normandy beaches and Mulberry harbors, dramatically reducing supply lines to forward units. As Red Ball operations tapered off, daily deliveries decreased accordingly. From a peak of 12 cast to 34.2 tons on August 20 tons, daily shipments dropped to approximately 5,000 tons by October and further declined to around 2,700 tons per day in early November. By mid-November, only 5 truck companies remained on Red Bull routes, compared to the peak of 32 in early September. The cost of this achievement was measured in exhausted personnel and worn-out equipment. Maintenance records showed that Red Bull trucks needed major repairs roughly every 30 days of continuous operations. The intense operational tempo accelerated wear on mechanical components beyond normal usage rates. Casualties from accidents, fatigue, and sporadic encounters with enemy forces amounted to several hundred individuals, though precise numbers are uncertain due to incomplete documentation under stressful circumstances. Nevertheless, this toll was relatively insignificant when compared to the strategic benefits it provided. The Red Ball Express allowed Allied troops to maintain relentless pressure on withdrawing German forces during a critical period in 1944 that could have potentially ended the war earlier if sustained. Despite fuel shortages leading to temporary halts and September operations, the continuous offensive from August through early October inflicted irreplaceable damage on German forces and advanced Allied armies toward Germany's borders. Military experts continue to debate whether alternative logistical priorities might have enabled a breakthrough of Germany's western defenses by autumn 1944, potentially bringing an end to the conflict before winter. These theoretical discussions often revolve around fuel allocation decisions, with some suggesting that focusing resources on either Field Marshal Montgomery's northern route or General Patton's southern thrust could have achieved the desired breakthrough that the broad front strategy hindered. However, these debates sometimes overlook the remarkable achievements of the Red Ball Express system, which managed to supply simultaneous offensives spanning a 400-kilometer front while maintaining operational flexibility to respond swiftly to changing tactical scenarios. Prior to this effort, no army in history had sustained such an operational tempo over such distances from secure supply bases using only road transport. The racial makeup of the Red Ball units mirrored America's segregated military at the time, but also challenged prevailing racist beliefs that underpinned segregation. African American soldiers served their country despite facing discrimination, both domestically and within the military structure. Their performance on the Red Ball Express demonstrated capabilities that racial prejudice had claimed they lacked. Nearly 3/4 of the drivers were black servicemen who had been assigned to non-combat support roles, not because of their lack of ability, but due to the discriminatory practices of 1944's military leadership. These men showcased exceptional courage, competence, and dedication under conditions as challenging as those faced by combat troops. They navigated through enemy territory, operated under fire when German units attempted to disrupt supply lines, and maintained operational discipline despite extreme fatigue that would have overwhelmed less resilient individuals. General George Patton, despite his own racial biases, acknowledged the indispensable role of Red Ball in advancing his army's mission. Colonel John Eisenhower, son of Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower, argued that without Red Ball drivers, the Allied advance across France would not have been possible. After the war, African American Red Ball drivers returned to a segregated America where many continued to face discrimination despite their service and sacrifices. Despite their accomplishments, these efforts also increased demands for the integration of military forces. The exceptional service of African American soldiers in logistical roles and combat positions during the Battle of the Bulge highlighted the irrationality of racial segregation within the armed services. President Harry Truman's 1948 executive order to integrate the military was influenced by evidence that segregation undermined military effectiveness. Red Ball drivers were keenly aware of this contradiction at the time, serving a country that did not grant them full citizenship rights while supplying troops fighting for freedom overseas and enduring discrimination domestically. The WWII campaign, promoted in black newspapers during World War II, advocating victory against both fascism abroad and racism at home, resonated deeply with Red Ball soldiers who embodied these dual struggles. In September 1985, more than 4 decades after the operation began, surviving Red Ball drivers gathered for a reunion in Alexandria, Virginia. Over 500 former drivers attended, bringing their families to share memories of their service. Among them was Corporal Charles Johnson, who had served with the 7th Military Police Battalion directing Red Ball traffic, and spoke about the significance of their contributions. These drivers moved over 400,000 tons of supplies in just 83 days, defying conventional wisdom that suggested supply chains would fail. Influenced American military logistics for decades to come. During the Korean War, smaller-scale dedicated supply routes were established, and Vietnam logistics adapted these principles to fit Southeast Asian conditions, such as Route 19 and Ho Chi Minh Trail interdiction operations. Desert Storm planners in 1991 studied Red Ball operations when designing supply systems for the liberation of Kuwait. Modern American military doctrine places great emphasis on logistics flexibility, redundancy, and the ability to sustain high operational tempo through superior supply chain management principles that directly stem from lessons learned during Red Ball Express and broader logistical achievements supporting Allied forces in World War II. Concepts like theater sustainment command structures, centralized logistics planning, and joint logistics operations all evolved from wartime experiences, including those of Red Ball. General Dwight D. Eisenhower included the 2-ton truck on his list of 6 most vital weapons that won the war in Europe, alongside the Dakota C-47 transport aircraft, the Jeep, the bazooka, the atomic bomb, and the bulldozer. The statistics of Red Ball operations remain impressive even today. 83 days of continuous operations, delivering an average of 5,000 tons daily, represents sustained logistical performance that equals or surpasses many contemporary military supply chains. The system transported around 412,000 tons of material in total, which equated to the complete supply needs for 30 divisions over a period of 2 years. This was accomplished solely through trucks and road networks, with no assistance from rail transport. The GMCC CKW trucks that were central to Red Bull's operations continued their service long after World War II. The United States military kept using CCKWs until the 1960s. Excess vehicles were either sold or donated to Allied countries worldwide, where they remained in active use well into the 1990s. In certain instances, these trucks' basic design influenced post-war American truck development and set standards that continue to be relevant today in modern military vehicles, such as the M35 series. Red Bull demonstrated that logistics capacity is a critical factor determining the feasibility of operational plans in contemporary mechanized warfare. Armies can only sustain their operations at a tempo and scale supported by their supply systems. Combat effectiveness diminishes if ammunition, fuel, or food supplies run out. The Americans recognized this principle and established robust logistics networks capable of sustaining continuous operations without interruption. German forces struggled to comprehend the extent to which American logistics would dominate the campaign. When German logistics officers who became prisoners of war were questioned about their supply difficulties, they consistently expressed shock at the American logistics capacity. They had studied American industrial production capabilities, but assumed that the logistical challenges of transporting supplies across the Atlantic and then inland through France would create exploitable weaknesses. Instead, they found that American logistics seemed to have no breaking point. American forces managed to deliver more supplies than combat units could consume, with artillery batteries expending ammunition at rates that would quickly deplete German reserves to the fanding ammunition. tank units advanced without experiencing fuel shortages, contrary to German doctrine which anticipated such pauses as inevitable. Infantry attacks were supported by firepower levels that German forces could not match due to their limited ammunition stockpiles. This ability of American forces to sustain operations indefinitely without logistical bottlenecks fundamentally altered defensive planning for the Germans. Each German defense strategy anticipated that the attacking forces would eventually pause to restock, providing chances for counterattacks. However, American logistical superiority negated these opportunities. Red Ball Express convoys swiftly delivered ammunition and fuel to frontline units at a rate faster than combat operations could deplete them. Hitler reasoned that a deep penetration into Allied rear areas would disrupt supply lines and create crisis-compelling negotiations. This plan faltered due to tenacious American defenses at Bastogne, St. Vith, and Elsenborn Ridge. More fundamentally, German logistics were inadequate to sustain the offensive. German panzer divisions initiated their operations with fuel for only 150 kilometers of advance. Hitler's strategy depended on captured American fuel depots to resupply advancing German units, but this assumption was gravely mistaken. Red Ball Express drivers and other transportation units in Belgium raced forward, evacuating vast amounts of gasoline and ammunition before the Germans could seize them. Under chaotic conditions as American forces worked to contain the breakthrough, thousands of gallons of gasoline and tons of ammunition were moved out of reach of German forces. These drivers displayed courage and effectiveness comparable to combat troops, ensuring that German units encountered empty fuel depots instead of the supplies they needed. By December 19th, just 5 days into the offensive, major German panzer formations reported critical fuel shortages. The 2nd SS Panzer Division halted its advance after crossing the Orthe River, immobilized by depleted fuel tanks within sight of their objectives. Similarly, the 1st SS Panzer Division abandoned numerous vehicles due to exhausted fuel supplies, with their advance stymied not by American resistance but by logistical failures. German ammunition shortages also emerged rapidly. Artillery units conducting preparatory bombardments quickly exhausted their stocks within days. The resupply effort faltered due to the inability of German horse-drawn supply columns to traverse icy Belgian roads at the necessary pace to support advancing troops. Additionally, the few motorized supply units Germany retained were hampered by insufficient fuel reserves. Conversely, American logistics responded swiftly to the crisis, reinforcing defensive positions within 48 hours. Despite losing crucial supply depots early on, American forces re-established their supply lines more rapidly than German forces could exploit the disruption. Artillery units defending key positions operated without constraints, firing at a rate that would have quickly depleted German ammunition stocks. The Battle of the Bulge highlighted the logistical disparity between the two sides that had been evident since Normandy. American forces were capable of sustaining unlimited material expenditure, whereas German forces struggled with starvation logistics, rendering sustained operations impossible once American supplies began to flow again. This massive logistical effort allowed for the unlimited expenditure of ammunition, breaking German defensive lines, while also maintaining fuel reserves for mechanized advances that outpaced German retreat capabilities. It provided such robust support that American commanders could engage in combat without concerns over supply failures undermining their operations. German forces never fully recovered from the losses sustained during the pursuit through France. Divisions decimated in Normandy and annihilated during the retreat to Germany were insufficiently rebuilt. Equipment losses surpassed industrial replacement capacity, and manpower casualties could not be replenished with soldiers of equivalent quality. With an estimated 3 million horses in use, this system consumed resources, limited operational tempo, and created vulnerabilities that American mechanization exploited ruthlessly. Every ton of fodder required for horse feed represented a ton unavailable for ammunition or fuel, and delays while waiting for horses to rest left units unable to respond effectively to rapid mechanized attacks. Factories churned out standardized vehicles in staggering numbers, appearing almost miraculous to observers at the time. In contrast, German industry faced insurmountable challenges, struggling to produce a variety of vehicle models using dwindling resources and forced labor, which could not match the productivity of free workers. By May 1945, when the war concluded, American forces in Europe were operating what was then the most advanced logistics system ever created. This system had supported the largest amphibious invasion in history, sustained a rapid and continuous advance unmatched in modern military operations, endured setbacks during the Ardennes offensive, and ensured Allied armies reached the Elbe River on schedule. They showcased American industrial might, demonstrated the critical role of logistics in winning wars as much as battlefield success, and illustrated that determination and organization could conquer any obstacle. These endless columns of trucks rolling through France symbolized American logistics dominance. Young drivers, many of whom were African-American soldiers facing discrimination while serving their country, proved invaluable to victory far beyond initial expectations. They kept armies moving despite logistical constraints that should have necessitated pauses. By delivering ammunition for sustained fire support, fuel for mechanized advances, and supplies to feed troops and maintain equipment, they effectively won the war as much as infantry storming Omaha Beach, tankers breaking through at St. Louis, or airborne soldiers holding Bastogne. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, supply sergeants contribute significantly to battles just as combat commanders do. The logistics supporting operations determined what was operationally feasible. American truck drivers transporting thousands of tons of supplies daily across the French countryside turned out to be more crucial than elite German units that were unable to reach their targets due to fuel shortages. This reality was evident in the effectiveness of American logistics, which disproved assumptions about American industrial weakness. Germany's leadership failed to comprehend this critical aspect when they confronted the world's leading industrial power. The trucks, rolling through France, carried not only essential supplies, but also tangible proof of a fundamental principle. Modern warfare is won by industrial capacity, an area where America far surpassed Germany. During its 83-day operation, the Red Ball Express delivered around 42,000 tons of goods, used up 50,000 tires, and pushed thousands of young drivers to their limits due to the urgent needs at the front lines. However, when innovation was required, American ingenuity, industrial prowess, and the dedication of countless soldiers created an unprecedented logistics network that became legendary. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that modern military power is as dependent on supply chains as it is on firepower. It highlighted that victories are often won in factories and along supply routes just as much as they are on battlefields, emphasizing the critical role played by truck drivers alongside tank operators. While history tends to remember dramatic events like D-Day, the liberation of Paris, and the crossing of the Rhine, behind every advance lay the essential but less glamorous work of logistics. The Red Ball Express, active for a mere 3 months in 1944, exemplified America's industrial might extending beyond weapon production to include the organizational capability to deliver those weapons swiftly where they were needed most. This was America's true strategic advantage, not only producing more than any adversary, but also delivering that output faster and more efficiently than enemies could respond. The Red Ball Express embodied this strength, rolling through France day and night, one truckload at a time, securing victory for the Allies.